everyone, this is Anthony, your DDI engineer. Today we're going to talk about DNS and DHCP roles and how to assign them to our managed BDDS. I only have one, or that would have been plural. Now, and to clarify or confirm, BDDS stands for BlueCat DNS DHCP Server. They don't have to have both roles, but they can. That's why it's called the BDDS. Now, what's a role? A deployment role determines the services provided by the server. That's the definition. What that means is I can assign a DHCP role to my BDDS, which means that once the role has been assigned and I've specified the IP space, clients can now get an IP address within that space. Now, in an organization, obviously, we need to set up the IP helpers to point to the DHCP server. Okay, so I'll show you how to do that. Not on the switch, but I'll show you what IP address to use, the server's IP address to use for that. In addition, other roles, of course, is DNS services. So there's the DNS master role. There's the stealth slave, caching servers, recursive servers, caching servers, hidden masters, things like that. So there's different types of roles that you can assign the BDDS on the DNS side. And then there's really only one role type, which is just DHCP. There's nothing. DHCP is fairly simple. It does one thing, more or less. It does a few things in relation to dynamic DNS, but I'm not going to show you that today. So let's get started. I hope you enjoy the video, and I hope it's not too long. And I apologize if it does get a little long. All right, so let's go to the servers tab. And as you can see, the default config is the same, which is labeled as default config. Under the servers section here, we can see everything is still the same. So the DNS server, it says it's managed. Yes. Now, that may or may not be true these days. I don't know. I could have put it into Proteus, remove Proteus control, which means that it may not be managed. But until I deploy it, you're not going to see any changes. Okay, just a side note there. Profile, BDDS 45, that can be important. Of course, it's important in terms of knowing what assets you have, but it's also important based on certain configurations as well. Okay, and we can always, I'll be talking about that in another video. Host name, dnsserver.abc.com. You know, with the host name and the name, this seems to be a DNS server. There is no roles assigned to it, so it's technically not a DNS server as of yet. It's nothing at this moment, but this is the name I use. I can change that anytime. Management IP address and service IP address. So note here, this is important, that the management IP address can be different than the service IP address. Okay, now the management IP address might be different if you decide to separate and set up a firewall to prevent, to limit, is better choice of words, to limit who is able to manage, in addition to authenticating, who is able to even get there, to get to that interface and access the interface to be able to authenticate. So it adds a layer of protection in terms of the management of your BDDS and how changes are made. But the service IP address, this is the IP address which your clients point to. So imagine that we assign the role of DHCP server, then in this case, we would have, imagine you have clients on the same network, or you have clients on a different network than DHCP server. You would use this IP address to update the IP helpers for your switches and routers on the network, right? So the network knows, the server, the IP address that's handing out DHCP leases. Okay, and then imagine this has a DNS role, and the role is caching server. In those cases, you want your client to point to that IP address directly, unless you may have anycast configured on the BDDS, and then that address can be different than the service IP address. Okay, We're not going to go there right now. I'm just kind of throwing out edge cases. All right. And then the XHA IP address, that address can also be different. Now, if this is the primary server, it would normally be the same IP address as the service IP, the XHA IP address. But the XHA IP address uses a VIP. So we'll talk more about XHA, but if you do have a BDDS with XHA and you see the service IP address and the management IP address, right? If they're all the same, awesome. If they're different, it's good to know which IP address to use, depending on what it's for. Okay, and then there's some other tabs here, not important. Maybe server groups could be important, but that's a different conversation. Okay, so let's start off with setting up a DHCP server. So the first step is let's go to the IP space. And as you can see, I've already created something here, and I'll just kind of go through it. So the first thing I did is create a block, right? And you can create any block you want. And you enter the entire block there. As an example, 10, like the one that already exists, 10.0.0.0/24 as an example. And then what you would do is hit add. Once you've created the block, from there you can create, and then the block is just a container within the GUI. It's not a thing that exists outside BlueCat. All right. And then from there, we would create a network. Okay. So in this case, I created the block is the same as the network, right? Same steps. I go to the plus sign, I create a network, right? And I would enter the same info /24. There's some additional information I can add here, right? Name, location, the view that it's in. I can have a custom gateway if I wanted to, and some other stuff, including a DHCP alert settings. Now, these are the watermarks in terms of, for example, if my DHCP range, if there was more than, let's say, if I set the alert at 80%, if my available IP addresses are overutilized and exceeds the 80%, the alert, as the wording states, it will alert me based on my global configurations. It will alert me via email or some other way that particular space, IP space, is being overutilized, and I should pay attention to it before clients run out of IP addresses. So you can set that in multiple different locations. You could set that at the network settings. You could set it at the DHCP range configuration. You can set the block. You could even set it at the global configuration within the administration tab. And I would recommend setting it at the global configuration for the purpose of easier management. And in a lot of cases, I usually set it at 8%. I think that makes a lot of sense. In most cases, it might be different, but I will show you how to set all that up in another video. So you would hit add. I'm going to hit cancel because I already created it. And then the next step is, once you have the network here for the DHCP server, once I assign the role, we need to create a DHCP range as well. Okay, without the range, this is not, even if I send the role, it's not going to hand out leases. So I need to make sure there's a range exists first. So if I click on the plus sign, I can specify start IP address and IP address. In this example, I put it .10 was a start and .245 in the last octet for the ending. Okay, again, you can set watermarks, hit add, and this is what you'll get. All right, so once you've done that, then what you want to do, just go back once, go to the go to the network that I was already in, and then let's go to deployment roles. Okay, so I'm going to delete this. I added it already. Let me remove it, and let me do it again. So under deployment roles, now what we need to do is hit the plus sign. I'm going to select DHCP role. The type is primary. I don't have another server at the moment, so it's going to stay as primary. And then here, it's a server interface. I'm going to select the interface. A window appears. It's the only server listed, but if I had multiple servers or BDDSs, they would be listed here. I'll select this one, and then I will select the interface and then hit add. Beautiful. Now, you'll notice also under that it says failover configuration. So specifically for a DHCP server, if I had a secondary BDDS, I could assign the other BDDS in a failover configuration. And if you don't know what DHCP failover is, really high level, it allows you to have two servers that provide a type of load balancing and redundancy. So those two servers, once in a failover configuration, will allow both servers will manage the same IP space. It'll hand out leases within the same pool of addresses, and it in addition to that, it does provide redundancy. So if one of the DHCP servers were to, if this was a physical server, or it doesn't really matter, virtual, physical, if that service breaks, if it stops working, if the VM, the hypervisor for that location fails, okay, assuming there's two hypervisors for each managed BDDS, then you would have another BDDS, or sorry, you would have the other DHCP server that would be able to hand out leases, renew leases until the other servers back up. Now it goes into a communications interrupted state when one of the servers fails, and there's a manual step that you may need to do, especially if it's going to be down for a long period or undetermined time. There is a manual process that you'll need to take. And in 9.4 or 9.5, you can actually do this via APIs as well. But and we could talk more about that later about DHCP failover. I'm just showing you that that's what the option is here, how to set it up. So once you select the other server, you would hit add and you're done. It does a replication between the two servers, and that's really all you need to do. It's fairly simple. And then from there, I would hit add, and that's it. I have the DHCP role added. It's primary. It's a primary DHCP server. This is the name of the server. There is no secondary, as I mentioned, and that's it. Now, the last step is I need to deploy, and I'll talk really quickly about deployments, high level again. I create another video about deployments because there can be a lot of information about that depending on your configuration. But there's two types of deployment modes. There's a full deployment, and then there's a differential deployment. A full deployment, what that is especially when you deploy for the first time a new role, is it deploys everything: the configuration, the view, whatever the role is, the networks, everything. It deploys everything. So imagine if this server has multiple roles, and within each role it manages hundreds of thousands of views and zones and resource records. A full deployment pushes everything or replicates everything to the BDDS from the BAM, right? Okay. And a differential deployment is where imagine I've deployed multiple times previously and I added a new DNS record, right? Or I added a configuration. In that case, I could perform a differential deployment and just push that change. Okay, that's really it. So what I've done so far is this has been completely staged. So imagine if this was this is production environment, and your manager says, hey, we need to add this role or this DHCP scope, for example. What we would do is we would do that in the BAM first, in the GUI first, right? And this doesn't affect services at all, production services at all. So you can do this prior to a change window, right? You can add the role. You can add the different deployment options, right? And when you're ready, once you're within that change window, at that moment is when you can deploy and push that to production. Okay. Now, I say that, take that with a grain of salt, because if you have scheduled deployments configured, and if you don't know what that is, I'll talk about that a little bit more in another video. But if you have scheduled deployments, you need to make sure that you disable scheduled deployments before you stage anything, right? Or, if it's within a large time frame, I guess you may not have to worry about it. But staging something with scheduled deployments kind of defeats the purpose a little bit, because you stage it and then it automatically deploys anyways. There goes that maintenance window, and then your boss is down your neck. So let's assume that scheduled deployments is not configured. But again, it is you can stage this. So let's say we're in our maintenance window, okay, and we're ready to deploy to the BDDS, the new role. What we do is, so I've already signed the role here. So the next step would be to go to the Service tab. There's a few different ways I can do this, but I'm gonna do it this way. I'm gonna go to the Service tab. Okay, I'm going to select, place a check beside the server. Okay, and then you see the gear here. There's actions. I'm going to select deploy. Now the other way, really quick, I can do it that same exact way. I can also click on the server. I wish I didn't do that. Okay, perfect. Didn't take as long as I thought. I can click on the server. Okay, and there's a lot of information, or there's more information here. Okay, DHCP is enabled, DNS is enabled. All right. So from here, from the name, I select the arrow key here, and then I can select deploy as well. So either way works. So I'll select deploy. Okay, and then it's going to ask me what services do I want to deploy. So I haven't assigned a DNS role. So if I were to select DNS, it would give me a message saying that it failed to deploy the service because there are no roles. Okay, and that's why it automatically has a check beside DHCP, because it knows it has a DHCP role already. Now, again, if this was deployed multiple times, this is giving me the option of it would give me the option of selecting force DNS full deployment. But again, because this has never been deployed before, okay, I do not have the option of selecting it, because it's automatically going to do a full deployment for the first time. All right, so I'm going to hit yes. And we can see here the state is deploying. The status is DHCP progress. There's not much there. Okay, beautiful. I mean, that's not good, but I mean, it's cool, because now we can troubleshoot this, right? So it says it failed, result X. So let's kind of do some troubleshooting here really quickly. So I'm going to go to deployments that occurred in the last 10 minutes. I can see it was a manual deployment. So if I click on the event ID, okay, cannot connect to server. Okay, I totally know why. So this is good. So we can see in the event summary for the BDDS, it says it cannot connect to this server. And the reason why it cannot connect to the server is I forgot to start it. So I'm going to pause the video for a second. I'm going to start it, and then we're going to try this again. Okay, so I paused the video. I started back up. I started the BDDS. Let's try this again. Okay, so I'm going to go back to, let's go back to servers. I'm going to select the server, deploy, DHCP only, yes. Okay, so state is queued, deploying, committing deployment. Okay, so it was successful, but really quickly, it says committing deployment. Committing, it's good to note that when it says committing, that's the stage of the deployment where it's communicating with the BDDS. And if you see committing and then it fails deployment, the problem is not on the BAM side, where in this example, BAM was unable to communicate with the BDDS. But when it's in a committing stage, okay, that means that there's a problem on the BDDS. So the BDDS, there could be a record or a configuration or a deployment option that was deployed and broke something, right? Or I mean, there's 1,000 different things that can if I could give you a list, that would make everyone's day a lot easier. But that's good to know. Focusing on the status when troubleshooting, focus on the status. Again, if it says committing, that means there's a the communications fine. Something wasn't it didn't fail because BAM because there was something on the BAM, right? BAM didn't notice something. It was committing it something on the BDS specifically is not working properly. So a lot of the focus at that time would be, especially looking at the logs, is looking on the BDDS logs. Of course, it's always good to look at the BAM logs, but the focus should be more on the BDS. Anyways, long spiel on that. Again, we can see here with the green check, the result, it's been deployed. Awesome. Okay. And it's always good to verify that. Let me just move this over here for a second. So this is my VM. As you can also see here, I have NetMRI installed. I'm going to be, whoops. Where did my stuff go? Okay. So I'm going to create another video on MRI and how that actually works with BlueCat, funny enough. Okay, so what I'm going to do really quickly is I'm going to verify that my DHCP services are working on my BDDS. So I can do that by just doing a tail bar log syslog, right? Okay, actually, I got to make sure that logging is. Oh, right. I don't have a client to get that to request a lease. All good though. But this is where you would go. You can tail the syslog, and in the syslog you can see exactly. You can see when a client, the whole DORA process. Another way you can verify that the service is running on your BDDS is if you do something called a PSM client node get. All right, and we can see here. Here, let me do this less. We can see here DHCP is enabled, and it's enabled. I know that because there's a 1 beside it. I mentioned before Proteus Control 1, it's managed. But you'll notice here that DNS is not enabled. Even though it did say in the GUI, it did say it was enabled in the GUI. It's not exactly true. This is one way of verifying that. Okay, awesome. So, and now the DHCP service role has been applied. Clients can now get an IP address from the range that I provided, assuming I had clients in this lab that I should have had. That's cool. All good. So really quickly, I'll show you how to assign DNS roles as well. And then we'll be done for today. So I'm going to click on the DNS tab. I have nothing here at all. So let's start from scratch. I'm going to click on the plus sign. I need to add a view first, right? So we're going to call this internal view. It doesn't matter. Okay, add. Now I have a view. And if you don't know what views are or zones, or you should know what a zone resource records are, but I might create some videos on that. I'm getting a lot of good suggestions on my YouTube and my LinkedIn. Please provide more feedback in terms of any type of instructions on how to do anything in BlueCat. I'm creating videos. I'm in the process of creating videos on using DNS Edge as well, and some other services like Gateway. That's kind of separate from the integrity product. I'm working on that as we speak, but for now, just integrity, just BAM BDDS. Okay, so the next step is the zone, top level. Sorry, this is a top level domain, but you can enter the entire fully qualified domain name from here. So if I click on the plus sign, I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to use my last name here, renovel.com. Actually, that domain actually does exist. I mean, it's not going to affect anything, but I don't own it, so maybe I shouldn't upsell that. Let's do Anthony Reneveld. Spell my last name.com. All right, so template from view. I want to make this deployable. So this is important as well. Again, similar to similar to the DHCP role, you can stage this, right? But the difference here is that this gives you the option of making it deployable or not. So if I, in the example, if I had scheduled deployments, right? I wanted to, if I had scheduled deployments configured, that means, for example, every 30 minutes or every hour, or every 2 hours, or once a day, right? It's hard for me to stage this because it would, the second I create this zone and a deployment happens automatically or manually, because there's usually more than one guy managing this, right? Managing your DDI infrastructure. That would push this zone to your DNS server, and if you're not within a change window, you might get your hand slapped. So what's cool is that you can actually you don't have to put a check beside deployable. So what that means is if you were to manually deploy after you create the zone, it still would not push this new zone to your DNS server, right? And that's pretty cool. So you can stage, especially in zone migrations, where you have to migrate, the zone and all the resource records and perform all this different testing and validation, right? This is a way of staging without pushing to your production environment. But in this case, again, it's a lab. I want to deploy it, so I'm going to make it deployable. Okay, and then I'm going to hit add. And what that does is, because I gave it a fully qualified domain name, it adds a TLD com, right? And if I click on that TLD, I then have the subzone anthonyreneveld.com. All right. So this is what I want to deploy. I don't want to deploy .com. I don't own it, right? But I do want to deploy Anthony Reneveld. Okay. So if I click on that zone, and then I go deployment roles, similar to when I was adding the DHCP role, I then go to the plus sign again. I only have one option. Makes sense. DNS role. And then we have the different role types as we discussed earlier. So we have primary of hidden master, secondary, stealth, secondary. If you don't know what these are, I mean, it's all good. Not a big deal. I can definitely talk more about it. Especially not really talking about what they are, but maybe talking about best practices and how, when to utilize a hidden primary or hidden master, right? Oh, they changed the name. It used to be master. Now it's primary. And when to use a stealth secondary, when to use forwarder stub servers and things like that. In terms of best practices, in terms of the best topology based on the needs and in service and in relation to security as well, because a lot of these different roles are based on certain routes and how to protect your internal infrastructure. So we'll talk more about that in another conversation, in another video. But for now, I'm going to make this a primary, right? DNS master. Okay. And then once I've set the type, then I go to server interface. Again, window appears similar to DHCP. I'm going to select the same server. I'm going to select the interface, hit add. Okay. And that's really all I need to do. I'll hit add. And now the role is primary. This is the primary DNS server and also the DHCP. It also has a DHCP role. Okay. And again, last step is once I'm ready, imagine I was doing this in a stage prior to a maintenance window. I'm in my maintenance window now. I'm ready to deploy and validate services are working. I'm going to select that and whoops, I don't want to delete it. Sorry, I'm in roles. What I want to do is I'll go to the servers tab again. I'm going to select the server that has the role. I'm going to select deploy. Now, I've already deployed DHCP and I haven't made any changes. So I don't really need to deploy DHCP again. I mean, it's not going to really break anything, but I don't need to, so I'm going to deselect it. Now, you'll notice here, now I can put a check here. And the reason why I can do that, like I said, is because the first time it does a full deployment. Now, because DNS has never been deployed, even though I don't have even if I don't select this, it will do a full deployment the first time. Okay, so I'll hit yes. State is deploying, committing deployment, as we just discussed before. Now, it went super quick, but I'll just let you know, normally, in a production environment, it's not that quick, right? So it's not like you have to kind of stare at it and try to catch it, right? You'll notice it. Okay, awesome. Green light. It's been deployed. Okay. Now, if I open up my BDDS here again, so what I can do, I mean, there's many different things I could do here. I'll do the PSM client first, and you'll notice now that DNS is equals 1, which means it's enabled. And another thing I can quickly do is, if I'm on the server, so if I do a dig at 0, which is querying myself for Anthony Reneveld.com, right? I get no error. I can see in the authoritative section, I can see the DNS server. Trying to highlight this. Not doing too well here. I can see the DNS server, right? It's the SOA. Nothing's set here. Okay. No errors listed here. So everything looks good. Really quickly as well, if I wanted to go back to the view, go back to the zone, I could add a quick record here. Test. I'll assign the IP address. Doesn't matter. Okay, add. Okay, I have a record here. Now, because I just added a record, again, just so you can really understand this now, I added a record, okay, but I didn't deploy. So can I query that record? Or will it resolve that record that I just created? Okay, so you can see here, it says NX domain, right? Because I didn't deploy. Now, let's deploy. Go back to the service tab. Yes, state is deploying. Successful. Oops, didn't mean to minimize anything. Okay, I kind of lost where I am. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so let's run the same query again. And you can see now that it resolved the name, the fully qualified domain name, test.anthonyreneveld.com, with the IP address 10.0.0.20. Perfect. All right, so we talked about we talked about the roles, assigning DNS and DHCP roles. We were able to do that successfully. We actually were lucky enough to troubleshoot a deployment issue, which was great. And we talked about deployments and staging. So that's the end of my video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I hope that was I hope this video was informative. And I hope for you guys to subscribe. And please look forward to new additional videos in the future in relation to BlueCat. I'm also creating videos about Infoblox as well, standing up NetMRI and getting Infoblox up and running to kind of showcase similar things we're doing in BlueCat. And then future videos, I'm looking into API automation and how to do that with BlueCat's APIs, as well as cloud, how best practices in terms of BlueCat in the cloud, utilizing Azure, GCP, AWS, right? Typical cloud services, as well as integrations and hybrid solutions with BlueCat and Infoblox and bind servers. Okay, so for me, that's kind of super cool, showing you how to set up different ways of um, configuring this, but also there's going to be future videos on consolidation of those services once they exist. Again, bind server, having a Windows server, domain controller set up, info blocks, and then showcase how to consolidate all those services back into um, um, either info blocks or BlueCat or both, if you guys are interested. And then also how to manage, how to kind of take advantage of BlueCat's IPAM solution, and also be able to um, um, promote bind servers, or make the bind servers, configure bind servers as a caching layer, and different topologies that I think are quite interesting for different organizations, depending on everything from security and budget, right? So again, please look forward to some of the future videos I'm building as we speak. Thanks again. Have a great day.